Corinth, 336 BC. Alexander the Great was visiting the city of Corinth as a result of his father's death, Philip II. Alexander was around 20 at the time, and during his stay he decided that he wanted to meet a famous philosopher who had been kicked out of Sinope, another city with a weird name, for attempting to devalue the local currency. A bit of a crime that said philosopher was able to attempt, as his father Lysias used to work in a bank. The name of the philosopher was Diogenes, also known as Diogenes the Cynic, or as was most often called back in his days, Diogenes the Dog. Little is known about Diogenes. In fact, not what is known about him comes from his own writings, but only second-hand accounts. Diogenes is said to have written 10 books, several letters, and 7 tragedies.
This country's a fucking joke, and the people in it's a joke. And Donald Trump is a fucking bitch.
None of them were able to survive the test of time, and for good reason. He's said to be born in Sinope between 412 and 404 BC. At one point of his life, it's not exactly clear when, he decided to pay a visit to the Oracle of Delphi, to ask for advice, where he was told that he should deface the currency. Oddly enough, as an unusual man that he was, he understood this in a literal sense, and thus him and his father began defacing coins by smashing them with a large censal stamp and rendering them worthless. As a result of this scandal, Diogenes was expelled from the city of Synod, and after evaluating the advice from the oracle, he decided that its true meaning was to deface political currency rather than actual currency. Following this, a life of radically challenging established customs and values began, giving a completely new meaning to the phrase walk the talk. Diogenes traveled to the city of Athens with a slave named Manes. Shortly after arriving, Manes yielded himself to freedom, and being his usual self, Diogenes found a meaning to this event, and later stated,
"If Manes can live without Diogenes, why not Diogenes without Manes?"
Diogenes is often presented as one of the founders of cynicism. He's even called the father of cynicism by some. Nevertheless, Diogenes found the teachings of Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, as the foundation for his unusual behavior and way of living. It is said that Diogenes harassed Antisthenes about taking him as a student, to the point that Antisthenes found himself in the need to beat Diogenes with a wooden staff for him to leave him alone, to which Diogenes responded,
"Strike, for you will find no wood hard enough to keep me away from you, so long as I think you have something to say."
A little bit creepy, but dedicated nonetheless. After such beautiful vocabulary, Antisthenes found himself unable to reject him again. Nonetheless, it's still disputed whether the two of them actually ever met or not. After a long time of improving his craft and way of living, Diogenes found himself living in a clay wine jar belonging to the temple of Scythe, exposing himself to the weather and forces of nature, and only keeping a small wooden bowl as his only possession that he would use to eat and drink. He would soon get rid of said bowl, however, in one of his most famous stories. Diogenes witnessed a young boy drinking water from the hollow of his hand and proceeded to exclaim,
"Fool that I am, to have been carrying superfluous baggage all this time. Take that, society,"
basically declaring himself to have become too materialistic, and proceeded to destroy the bowl. During his time in Athens, he became also well known for eating and drinking in the marketplace, which was very looked down upon, as well as walking in full daylight with a lamp while stating,
"I am looking for a man."
Modern sources state that what he was actually saying back then was,
"I am looking for an honest man," or whatever.
But regardless, it was clear that Diogenes was stating by reasoning that he was looking for a human, but all he was finding was rascals and scoundrels, referring to the people in town. Another well-known tale of Diogenes was one of his encounters with Plato, which often resulted in him mocking the guy. Plato, while giving a discourse, gave his definition of a man as
a featherless bipedal.
Diogenes then proceeded to pluck a chicken and brought it into Plato's academy and yelling,
"Behold, I've brought you Plato's man."
Soon after that, Plato made some corrections to his definition and uploaded an apology video on YouTube.
"I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment."
Things will change soon after for Diogenes though, as in a voyage to Aegina, he was captured by pirates and sold as a slave in Crete to a Corinthian named
Senades.
When
Senades
asked Diogenes what he was good at or what he was doing before that, he replied with,
"I used to govern men."
What?
Understandably, the man was amazed by this and proceeded to make Diogenes a tutor for his 2 sons. Now, from here on, Diogenes' story becomes a little more blurry. Some say that he was set free after becoming a cherished member of the household. Some say that he was set free almost immediately after being sold, famously urinating, defecating, and masturbating in public. I wonder why. And some say that he grew old and died in the house of his owner in Corinth. Some accounts even tell stories of him living in his new condo in Corinth, another jar, near Cranium, in Corinth, and more or less crossing paths with Philip II. Philip II was marching around Corinth while the entire town was working on preparations for an incoming attack. The whole town was out of control. While some were trying to help, many others were desperate. In the midst of this, Diogenes found himself rolling his jar up and down the Cranium. A friend of his saw him and asked Diogenes for a reason. Diogenes' explanation?
I do not want to be thought the only idler in such a busy multitude. I am rolling my tub to be like the rest.
This has been interpreted in different ways. Some say that Diogenes was trying to portray the idea of how useless it is to stress over external factors that we have no control over, and that by doing it we're only making ourselves miserable. A very stoic philosophy. Others say that he was providing the people in town with the idea of moving their houses somewhere else in order to avoid the conflict. Needless to say, his death was also a sort of debate, as some of his contemporaries alleged that he held his breath until he died, which is the most common and accepted theory. It's also the most Rockstar theory. Others say that he became ill from eating raw octopus, and others that he suffered from an infection due to a dog bite, which is understandable since the guy literally lived amongst dogs, thus the name Diogenes the dog. At a certain point close to his death, Diogenes was asked how he wished to be buried, to which he replied he wanted his body to be thrown outside the city walls so wild animals could feast on his body. When asked if he might have been treated like this after he died, Diogenes replied,
Not at all, as long as you provide me with a stick to chase the creatures away.
Confused, who I can only assume were guards, asked Diogenes,
No, Diogenes, you're messing with us, right? How are you gonna use the stick if you're dead, my guy?
Diogenes then replied,
If I lack awareness, then why should I care what happens to me when I am dead?
or in other words,
Exactly. You fuck.
despite all these magnificent tales of wisdom and displays of indifference, Diogenes' most famous story is without a doubt his encounter with Alexander the Great, better known as the guy that speedrun his way to conquer the Persian Empire. It was during this encounter in 336 BC that Alexander wanted to meet the famous Diogenes during a Sunday morning. I don't really know if it was a Sunday. Alexander presented himself thrilled of meeting Diogenes and proceeded to ask him if there was anything he could do for him. Here he was, the most powerful man in the world at that moment, asking an individual labeled as a dog by society if there was anything his poor little dog heart desired. His response?
Yes. Stand out of my sunlight. You bitch.
Alexander, understandably amazed by this, then declared,
If I were not Alexander, then I should wish to be Diogenes.
To which good old Diogenes responded,
If I were not Diogenes, I would still wish to be Diogenes. Boy.
In another account of this encounter, it is said that Alexander found Diogenes to be looking attentively at a pile of bones. When asked what he was doing by Alexander, Diogenes replied,
I am searching for the bones of your father but cannot distinguish them from those of a slave.
If you know how I feel, why would you say that? Like, you put me in such an uncomfortable situation. Like, you know I'm not happy. You know I'm trying to see if it'll work out here, and I know that it's...
Diogenes eventually passed away in 323 BC, between the ages of 81 and potentially 91 years old. As stated before, Diogenes is often cited as one of the father figures of the school of cynicism. Needless to say that he never recognized himself to be anything even close to that. Rather, he was perfectly fine with the idea of being called a dog. The actual father of cynicism can be tracked down back to Antisthenes, the man that Diogenes admires so much. The school of cynicism believes that the purpose of life is to live in virtue, in agreement with nature. Cynics live their life by rejecting conventional desires and trying to live as simple as they can with as little possessions as possible. Diogenes was a man that lived the way he proclaimed. He didn't care at all what other people had to say or thought about him. He urinated, defecated, and masturbated in public. He ate when he felt hungry, he drank when he was thirsty. He mocked those who considered themselves to be powerful or virtuous and called them out in their ignorance or self-absorbance, leaving a mark in the world, in fact, much greater than his master and many more cynics and philosophers that came before and after him. Diogenes went down in history as a man who truly lived according to his values and beliefs. Today, Diogenes syndrome is a name given to a mental disorder, given to those individuals who suffer from self-neglect, social withdrawal, apathy, compulsive hoarding, and lack of shame. If Diogenes would have lived in modern times, he more than likely would have been institutionalized. But more importantly, he wouldn't give a crap.